Welcome, everybody, to the Brightline Eating Program bonus webinar, Beating the 2 a.m. Syndrome. I'm Mike Blackstone, but we're going to start with something a little fun here. I'm going to check the chat box, though, to make sure that people are coming. Okay, I see Barbara. Welcome, Mike. We cannot wait for your pearls of wisdom. All right. Thank you, Barbara. I just took a breath and a little drink of water here a moment before I clicked the broadcast button, and I'm just surrendering it to the gods and the goddesses as to how it all works out. But so you seem to be the first one. We've got Bambi, and so if all of you, as you are arriving, you could put your name in there and also just hello and where you're from, and keep it brief. I mean, actually, over 1,500 people signed up for this webinar, so I'm not sure how many are going to show up live, but I'm expecting that there will be quite a few. And I do see people coming in. I see Maureen, hello, wide awake. And someone from Sydney. Oh, and it just flashed by so fast. Okay, and we're starting. I don't see a number as to how many are coming on, but they're coming on very quickly. So we're going to start with this. If you log in I'm going to play this video, and it's just fun. So let's get to that. Let's see if this works. Oh, it did work. It ended at the proper time. We were watching this video ourselves on our end, and it said there was like 17 minutes to go, and we knew that that was not possible. So it ended. So welcome, everyone, to this webinar. I'm going to just check, see how many. We have 330 people here live now out of 1,530 that signed up, and I'm so happy to see you all here. And I'm looking forward to delivering a bang-up webinar and workshop here that you're going to walk away from with a fantastic and a profound breakthrough in your inner relationship with yourself. And I know you heard me say in the introduction, the most important relationship in life is the one with yourself. So I'm going to get into the webinar very quickly here and start it. So beating the 2 a.m. syndrome of internal conflict, understanding and taking charge of the dynamics of food temptation. So I'm going to get right into something controversial, episodes of food temptations. And, what is the real problem here with them? So first, food temptations are actually examples of a more encompassing phenomenon called intrapersonal conflict. And in turn, episodes of intrapersonal conflict are examples of a deeper phenomenon. And here's where I'm getting controversial. It is conflict between the right and left hemispheres of the brain. This is what I've come to know over the last 21 years. And during this program, I think you're going to come to a similar conclusion. And it's going to be mind-boggling. I want to tell you a little bit about me. I met Susan Peirce Thompson about a year ago in October. And during that time, I didn't know she was doing Bright Light Eating when we had a few conversations back then. But then I found out and watched her launch videos last February for her second boot camp. And I was really impressed. And I also thought that, hey, this could work. And I realized, this problem with sugar and flour is really a problem. And I know for myself personally down through the years that sugar is like just throwing sand in the joints of my knees and arms and makes me stiff all over. And so, in June, well, let me go back to February. So from February, boot camp started March, April, and May. And I very imperfectly kept to some bright lines, very imperfectly. But even doing it just kind of half-assedly like that, I lost about 3 pounds a month. I went from 229 down to 217. So, and so I decided that, that's working pretty good. So when the June boot camp came along, I'm watching the launch videos for that. And I decided that I'm going to join that. But at the same time, Susan had asked me to do a webinar, a free bonus webinar during that June boot camp, which I did on July 15th. But I started the boot camp, just like all of you, there are many of you who did the June boot camp that are on this webinar again. And one of the amazing things that happened is that it was an answer to my prayer, the June boot camp, because I had been, for the previous 3 or 4 years, been feeding my boys who are 15 and 12 years old now. I had been feeding them junk food, feeding myself junk food, and we were putting on weight. And it wasn't good, and I felt guilty all the time. And then when I was watching one of the June launch videos, Elliot, my oldest 15-year-old, he came into the room and he watched the end of the video with me. And he turned to me and he said, "Dad, I want to do the program too." And I was shocked because Susan talks about this, not for kids, but he wanted to do it. So I said, yeah, okay. And both he and my 12-year-old, Ewan, we started the boot camp for ourselves on June 12th. And we are now on day 152. And Elliot started off at 245 pounds. He's down to 215, down 30 pounds. Ewan started off at 160. He is now down to 135, 25 pounds lost. And me, if I go back all the way to February when I started just halfway applying bright lines, and then the rest of what I lost from June to now, I'm down 40 pounds. Down, and that's exactly my goal weight. I weighed myself this morning, 179, 40 pounds down. Now, I've been struggling for years to lose weight. In spite of the fact that I'm an executive coach and have been for years, I couldn't get my weight under control. But here in this program, there were 3 things that were working for me. Number one, the boys joined the program, and that gave me a tremendous added incentive to make this program work. And then number two, here's the Bright Line Eating Program. And I have never encountered a program as comprehensive and as effective as this program in my life. And it just works. The portions work. And you have to adjust the portions from time to time, but everything about this plan works. And the success of the boot camp, the big success here in this October boot camp, is showing up and supporting the fact that this program works. It's not just the best of its kind. In my experience, it is the only one of its kind for sustainable weight loss. And then the number three thing that supported me is during episodes of food temptation specifically was my relationship with myself, having some years back resolved my own inner conflict between my hemisphere personalities. This is the three of us about 18 months ago. We're on a little weekend getaway in Sedona. So sorry if any of those pictures of what they're holding triggers you. So I'll move away from it fairly quick, but you can see that all three of us have a little bit to lose. Now, we're somewhere around 2003, I had an experience that was just like burned into my memory. I was on my millionth diet, and my habit, even when I'm on a diet, is to, in the middle of the night, 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, that's why I call it the 2 a.m. syndrome, I'm downstairs with the fridge door open, 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm looking for something to eat that I can eat that's still on my plan, my diet, and I'm not finding anything, and I'm thinking, oh, good, I'm going to get to go back upstairs to bed, and I'm going to be able to stay on my diet, and then this thought pops in, oh my God, the freezer. So I opened the freezer, and sure enough, there's a tub of ice cream in there, and you know what happened? I finished that thing. And I went back upstairs to bed, totally defeated, angry, depressed. But what was different about this experience is the next morning I woke up with this burning question. I mean, it was really in my head, just burning. How could I stand in front of my refrigerator, wanting to eat and not wanting to eat all at the same time? How is that even possible? Well, I made a vow to answer that question, and damn if I didn't figure it out. It took me a couple of years to connect all the dots on it. But I was experiencing intrapersonal conflict around food. So I talked all about this slide, and I realized, I made this vow to answer this question: how could I be looking at the inside the refrigerator and wanting to eat and not wanting to eat at the same time? And I was experiencing intrapersonal conflict within the hemispheres of my brain. So what is it? It's episodes of conflict that occur solely within the psychological dynamics of an individual's own mind, and the term is interchangeable with inner conflict. And the working definition that I use is that inner conflict is the presence of conflictive inner dialogue, opposing thoughts, feelings, preferences, beliefs, and values, solely occurring within the psychological dynamics of an individual's mind. And it reaches the level of problematic inner conflict when an individual experiences episodes with enough frequency, duration, and distressing intensity as to strongly wish they didn't have it. So before I get to the heart of it, I'm going to do some logistics here. In my introduction video, I mentioned to you how I've been an executive coach and transformation coach for 26 years. And for the last 21 years, I've been aware of the neuroscience that's related and intimately involved in inner conflict. And over those years, 21 years, I have not been able to find out much information anywhere really about inner conflict. And I've was working with so many people that had it, that I eventually came up with a listing and I've cataloged 5 different types of inner conflict. And the first one is repressive inner conflict. It's conflict where the left hemisphere represses the right hemisphere emotional contribution and expression. And the second type of inner conflict is impulsive, where very spontaneously the right hemisphere will enact an impulse. I've heard so many experiences in the Facebook page with our Facebook page about people who, will pop something in their mouth before they even know it. Now, that's the right hemisphere doing that. And then, of course, the left hemisphere is the personality that later regrets it. And you get upset with yourself when that happens. The third type of inner conflict is self-abusive. And this is where the left hemisphere interpreter, you've heard Susan talk about it, but you'll learn much more about it later. The left hemisphere interpreter, in an inner dialogue, uses negative self-judgments and through the inner dialogue, and basically you beat yourself up, and it's your inner critic. And then the fourth type of inner conflict is compulsive, different from impulsive, number two, because compulsive, you get a little bit of warning. When you're in an episode of a food temptation, you're in this episode, and that it's perilous, and you want to stay on your bright lines, but this compulsion to eat sometimes can get so irresistible, and that compulsion is initiated by the right hemisphere, and the right hemisphere builds up intensity around this compulsion. And then if it results in a binge, then the left hemisphere, as soon as the binge is over, regrets, gets angry. So there are other kinds of compulsion too besides eating. I just gave you that one example. Any unwanted behavior that is compulsive is initiated by the right hemisphere and then is followed by the left hemisphere regretting it. And often that circles back up to number three, self-abusive, and beating yourself up for it. The fifth one I'm really not going to say anything about because it is restricted mostly to men, and I don't think anyone here actually has that. So I'm going to give you one general example of each of the first four types of inner conflict. Now, the repressive. In certain situations, you really want to be yourself, to do or say something, but you suppress your full expression, and then you later wish you could have expressed yourself. Here's a general example of impulsive. You get impulses and you just act on them without the chance to think, but you later regret what you did after the fact. And the self-abusive type of inner conflict. Within your mind, you beat yourself up mildly or severely, and you feel bad about yourself. And the fourth one, compulsive inner conflict, you get a compulsion to do something or not do something that you find impossible to resist, and after the fact, you feel bad about giving into it. Now I'm going to give you actually a few more examples because in just a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask you all to remember a recent example of your own experience of an episode of inner conflict that you've had. And in this example that you come up with of your own inner conflict, recent, you're going to use the memory and the understanding of that experience as your starting point, as your takeoff point for doing the personal reconciliation later in the workshop portion. So now here's a few more examples then. 4 examples of the repressive type of inner conflict. In interactions with certain people, you are submissive, or you hold back what you're thinking or feeling out of some fear of consequences or insecurity with yourself, but wishing you could express more fully. Be yourself. Second one is repressing yourself out of guilt, that it would be wrong to express your thoughts or feelings, that your thoughts and feelings are wrong. Third one is in certain situations, you repress yourself out of some fear or insecurity. For example, in groups, at events, parties, family gatherings, business meetings, but you wish you didn't have to repress yourself in those. And the fourth example is you just generally keep a very tight rein on your full self-expression in most circumstances and displays of emotion, but wishing you could feel a lot freer to express yourself in a lot more different contexts. Now, some examples of the impulsive type of inner conflict. Blurting out some expression and immediately or later feeling regret from embarrassment or guilt or being exposed to judgment or ridicule. or spontaneously eating without thinking and then regretting it, like we talked about, or impulse buying without thinking and later regretting it. And then also, fourth one is expressing like flashpoint anger or irritation and later regretting that you expressed that. Now, here's some examples of the self-abusive. Internal dialogue that derides and ridicules or belittles yourself. For example, could be, how could you do that? That was so stupid. What were you thinking? That was dumb. You showed your true colors. Or internal dialogue calling oneself derogatory names. For example, you idiot. You're so stupid. I'm so stupid. You're weak. You're worthless. You're spineless. You're a coward. And then a fourth would be engaging in longer inner monologues of self-criticism. For example, you are worthless. Everybody always said so. That you'd never amount to anything, and on and on. And such internal name-calling and these longer monologues can be in the first-person pronoun, where you're saying to yourself, you are, or it can, no, that was the second-person pronoun, where you're saying you are, or it could be in the first person, where you're saying, I am, all these things. And this self-abuse often goes hand in hand with the regret that follows episodes of that, the first, second, and fourth types of inner conflict that I spoke about. The first being repressive, the second being impulsive, and the fourth being compulsive. Now, examples of the compulsive: saying yes to others' requests or demands and later regretting it, wishing one could have stood up for themselves, or irresistibly, like always putting yourself second to the perceived needs of others. Episodes of food temptations where internal argument goes on back and forth before giving into the urge and then regretting it as a failure. Going to excessive effort to be perfect, like compulsively perfect, but not liking that you feel you have to do that. Exerting excessive efforts to please others, saying what you think they want to hear, and then you're not liking yourself for doing that. Or working long hours to avoid failure and then not liking having to do that. So with these examples of inner conflict fresh in your mind, I want you to think of a recent episode of inner conflict. Think of a recent episode of inner conflict that you personally experienced. Now, it doesn't have to be so recent, but something memorable. And again, here's a couple of very general examples. You kept something, or you kept or held yourself in check, but wish you hadn't or didn't have to. You did something impulsively you didn't want to. You beat yourself up over something, or you struggled over doing something or not doing it. I want you to write down that example of your inner conflict, because you're going to use that experience in the latter half of the workshop to do the process that I call a personal reconciliation. Now, how widespread is the problem of intrapersonal conflict? About 1 in 3 people are affected worldwide in all the developed countries. Every clients that I've had from every country in Europe and some countries from Asia and South America, all of them have inner conflict, and approximately in that same ratio, about 1 in 3 people. More than 70 million adults, just here in the U.S., 70 million adults 21 to 70 years old, endure distressful episodes of it. And more than 15 million children and teenagers, 10 to 20 years of age, they endure distressful episodes of inner conflict. And here in our population of Bright Line Eating, well, I'm going to ask Pamela if we've got any responses in that poll to give us an indication of what the ratio is in this group. Have you got anything yet, Pamela?
89 yes and 11% no.
89%?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's roughly in line. And when I did this webinar last July 15th, for the first time for the third boot camp, we got a 93%. Everybody on that webinar, 93% experienced episodes of inner conflict. And I think, I don't know if I got the distinction, but inner conflict in other situations, yeah, that was in the question. Do you experience inner conflict in other contexts besides food situations? And so Pamela's telling me we've got 89% in this group of all of us who are here in this program today. And how bad is the problem of intrapersonal conflict? Well, I think almost all of you know regular episodes of inner conflict cause untold emotional pain and suffering. It really hurts, and it's so depressing to be experiencing episodes of severe inner conflict. Chronic episodes of inner conflict and turmoil cause physical symptoms as well, like chronic fatigue. Episodes of inner conflict can cause psychological issues like depression and contribute to health issues like lowered immunity and even disease. But in the ultimate, severe inner conflict causes the greatest majority of suicides. And the most sinister aspect of inner conflict is that it flies under the radar of detection. The vast majority of people suffering with it don't know that they have it. Like when I ask, I can't ask a client. I've tried any number of times to just ask them directly, are you experiencing inner conflict? And they'll come back to me and they'll say, what do you mean? And then they'll ask me, well, give me an example. And I have to explain it to them. They don't know just automatically. They don't know that they've got it. And once that I explain it to them, then they go, yes, I've got that 1 out of 3. And then they understand what I'm talking about. So it's sinister because it's a malady for which there is no diagnosis. And there's virtually no useful information available about it. It's like a black hole. If you Google inner conflict, intrapersonal conflict, you won't find much of anything of value. A little bit you'll find. But if you've got a pain in your stomach or a pain in your head or an ache in your arm, you can log on, you can Google that and you'll come up with health.com has plenty of answers, drugs.com, webmd.com has plenty of answers for other types of maladies that we experience, but not for inner conflict. It's an unknown malady for which there is really no widely known remedy. The best we have actually are just sinister hints of inner conflict in our literature and in our collective psyche. Now, some examples are like you've heard the expressions Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, my evil twin, my demons, inner critic, inner voices, inner saboteur, alter ego, the shadow, the dark side. Even Freud's negative view of the unconscious tells us that there's a part of us we need to be afraid of. Some people say the sins of the father and the Furies. Furies are 3 entities from Greek and Roman mythology that if a man does bad, these Furies will descend and make that man go mad. All of these hints camouflage and distort the truth that there is a heroine and a hero actually within each of us, and she's waiting to come out. So what is the solution? Well, first, there is no complete cure for inner conflict and struggle. In fact, inner conflict, when it's intermittent and less severe, leads to personal growth and self-discovery and has led to some of the greatest advances and inventions in our history. But there is a breakthrough remedy to the severe and needless forms of inner conflict. A breakthrough in the sense that there is a remedy to resolve the core of the problem. And the core of the problem is conflict between the right and left hemispheres of the brain. So for this workshop, I'm going to take you on a fascinating journey into the deeper aspects of consciousness in the brain, your brain and mine, I'll present you with a radically new model for understanding inner conflict and the dynamics of episodes of food temptations. I'll introduce you to how to discover yourself by learning as you go through structured daydreams, and how to use a structured daydream, a personal reconciliation, to create deep levels of inner peace, resilience, and an inner relationship with yourself you will absolutely love. And you will experience that the truth that the most important relationship in life is the one with yourself. Now, by the end of this workshop, you will have met Roger Sperry, a 1981 Nobel Prize winner for his work with split brain subjects. I'll say more about that later. In the 1960s and 70s, to Michael Gazzaniga, a neuroscientist and a colleague of Sperry's. He was the discoverer of the interpreter that we've heard about in quite some detail from Susan Pierce Thompson. He was the discoverer of the interpretive function in the left hemisphere. And he is now called the father of modern cognitive neuroscience. And to Ian McGilchrist, he's a noted UK neuro researcher and psychiatrist. He's an author of the book, The Master and His Emissary. And I'll introduce you to Jill Bolte Taylor, whom I suspect many of you already know from her book, My Stroke of Insight, which details her story of experiencing a devastating stroke in her left hemisphere years ago. And you are going to understand the basics of split brain science and its profound implications for a radical new understanding of the human mind and an understanding of inner conflict, and more importantly, how to resolve it. And you're going to get to know your sister, your right hemisphere personality, and accomplish your first personal reconciliation process, blending into your thinking and your behaviors the best aspects of both of your brain hemispheres' personalities, the left and the right, and get on the wondrous road to flawless confidence in yourself. And one of the best first steps is what we're going to do, a personal reconciliation. And we'll do that pretty soon now. Now, I just want to tell you a little bit about me. I don't think you need to know a bunch about me. I've had my issues back in the 82 to 87. I wound up going through a 5-year period of some bad stuff happening. Went through a horrific divorce, filed bankruptcy, was involved in kind of a public controversy that was very publicly humiliating. And back in those years, I did not think very much of myself, did not like myself. And I made a vow that I would figure out what made me tick and that I would fix myself. And that in the process, I would somehow, someday help others as well. Well, I was in the middle back in the early 80s, in the midst and throes of deep inner conflict myself that I had no clue about way back then. But in June of 1988, I moved to Arizona to begin a new life here. I got certified as an NLP trainer. I'm not going to explain NLP if you don't know, and I apologize for that. Sometimes it takes too long to explain, so you can Google it and find out. Certified as that, and I began doing self-growth seminars in September of 88. And then in 89, I got recruited into doing corporate seminars, and I went on the road for years. And in that same year, 88, I began executive coaching and gradually moved into transformation coaching. And since then, I've worked with one-on-one with about almost 4,000 business professionals from a dozen Fortune 500 companies, but other smaller companies and us regular folks too. And early on, I recognized this pattern of inner conflict, about 1 in every 3 people that I work with. And so I began specializing in that, not in small part because I experienced lots of it myself. And this is what we're working on during this webinar workshop. And I also saw a second pattern where clients were still being affected by past negative conditioning from experience they had when they were very young, like 2 to 12 years old. And working with that, neutralizing past negative conditioning was actually my first specialty ahead of resolving inner conflict. And that was because everybody I worked with had residual effects from past negative conditioning, everyone with no exceptions. So I specialized in those two areas, and when clients got relief in either or both areas, they were breakthroughs, and that was very satisfying for me. That was became my love, working one on one like that, and working in the area of now that having breakthroughs. That's where the fancy term transformation coach comes from. I never was too much satisfied with people making incremental improvement. I like to help them experience breakthroughs for themselves. So in 1994, I was 5 years into my executive coaching career, and I ran into, in a book, Roger Sperry and the subject of the split brain. I was leafing through a college textbook, like first year college psychology, and there was a chapter about Roger Sperry and his split brain work. You'll be learning a lot more about it in just a couple of moments, but he won a Nobel Prize 1981 for his work with split brain patients, and I was reading about it on that day. And there was another fellow, Michael Gazzaniga, was mentioned too in that article. And he's the one I think I've mentioned a couple of times. He's come to be called the godfather of split brain science and the father of modern cognitive neuroscience. And this, in 1994, I was just floored by this. I was blown away. And it did because it opened the door for me to understand in a whole new way the neurodynamics of the inner conflict that my clients were experiencing. And so what is a split brain? In 1961, Sperry and Gazzaniga began studying a special group of patients who had severe, intractable, and life-threatening epilepsy. And as a last resort for treating their epilepsy, they underwent surgery, severing the wiring bundle that connects their two half-brains together. It's called the corpus callosum. And the surgery was a success, but these patients could no longer communicate conscious thoughts, feelings, or information of any kind between their right and left hemispheres, as you're going to learn. They came to be called split brain patients or split brain subjects. And let's see, I'm looking at a picture of the neuroanatomy of the split brain, and that's not going to help you much because you're not seeing it. So, but the corpus callosum is a band of about 250, 300 million nerve fibers that are very, very thin, about 1/10 the diameter of a human hair. And there's, let's say, 250 million of them. And right between the left and the right hemispheres where this corpus callosum comes into a bundle. And from there, in the center point between the hemispheres, it's like two ponytails, like one to the right and one to the left, where the wires go out from the right and to the left from this central bundle, and they fan out into the furthest reaches of both the right and the left hemisphere. And this is the part of the brain that was severed, and that stops all conscious communication, all cognitive transferring of thoughts or feelings between the hemispheres. So the left hemisphere no longer knows what the right is thinking or doing, and the right hemisphere no longer knows what the left is thinking or doing. So I'm going to show you a video right now, and in this video you're going to see a split brain patient, and this video was produced around the mid-1960s, somewhere between 62, 64, because the first split brain patient that they started to study was in 1961. So that's about where this video had to have been shot. And it shows a split brain patient trying to solve a little six object puzzle, 6-piece puzzle. And he's first asked to do it with his left hand, which is connected to his right hemisphere. And he's able to successfully put together this 6-piece puzzle. And then he's asked to do it with his left hemisphere, but his left hemisphere cannot do it. And watch, you're going to find this funny because his right hemisphere is going to come up and try and help him, and he winds up having to sit on his left hand connected to right hemisphere to keep from interfering. But you'll see that. And then you're also going to see what it's like when the narrator, who happens to be Michael Gazzaniga at that point, when the narrator has them start trying to work the puzzle together with both hands. Here we go.
If speech originates in the left half of the brain, are there any functions special to the other half? Here, a split brain subject provides the answer. As he tries to copy this pattern with blocks, we discover his ability is confined to his right half brain.
Now let's remember that the left hand is governed from the right hemisphere, and you will see that he has absolutely no problem in solving the problem. When the patient tries to solve the problem with his right hand, which is governed from the left hemisphere, we find that he is not capable of doing it. Namely, that the right hand, which is governed from the left hemisphere, is intrinsically incapable of performing this kind of visual constructional tasks. It's interesting to note that the whole perspective is gone. He has 3-in-1 block combinations. It doesn't even square them up. You can see the left hand wants to keep helping the right and is interfering. Well, we're now seeing that the left hand can perform the problem and that the right hand cannot. Now the question becomes, what happens when you allow both hands together to try to solve the problem? And what we find out is that they fight over each other. One hand knows how to do it, and one hand does not, and so they more or less squabble. And the reason for this is that the hemispheres are disconnected. The right hemisphere controls the left hand, and the left hemisphere controls the right hand. And these are almost mutually independent systems. It was as if two people were fighting over performing this task. One knew how and one didn't, and one would fight for dominance of the situation.
Some of the videos were just great to watch again, because there are subtle nuances in some of these videos that you don't catch the first, second, third, even fourth time that you're watching them. And I've got a few more for you. What I want you to take away from that first video, actually, is that after the corpus callosum is disconnected, internal conflict within the hemispheres is no longer possible. But you notice outer physical conflict is still possible. And Gazzaniga says at one point, it's as if they're two people and they're squabbling. There's really no as if here. There are two independent personalities, and they are squabbling. They're separate personalities. And you get, in my view, this is like compelling evidence that inner conflict within us normal people is literally conflict between the right and left hemispheres of the brain. And outer conflict, like what you saw in the video there, appeared in other bizarre situations after the corpus callosum was disconnected. There was a woman who, after the surgery, would go into her closet in the morning looking for something to wear, and she'd pick out something, but it would be picked out by her left hand, and it was something she did not want to wear. And she, with her left hand, was her right hemisphere. Her left hemisphere didn't want to wear that, and she tried to put it back, and she couldn't get her left hand to let go of it until she called for her daughter to come into her closet to help her with that. And there was another woman who had difficulties grocery shopping, that her left hand, right hemisphere, would grab something, put it in the cart, and she, left hemisphere, didn't want that for whatever reason. She would put it back, and then her left hand, right hemisphere would put it back in the cart, and grocery shopping for her was occasionally a nightmare. Now, this is all called the disconnection syndrome, and this kind of outer conflict happens for maybe a period of some months after the surgery, but it doesn't go on generally for most split brain patients, forever. And then there was the story of the man who couldn't dress himself, that had trouble in the morning. As fast as his right hand, left hemisphere would button up his shirt, his left hand, right hemisphere would come along again and unbutton the shirt. And there was the evidence, the story of one man who got angry, got into an argument with his wife, and went after her with his left hand, trying to do some physical harm to her, and his right hand grabbed his left hand to try to restrain it. And it was his right hemisphere being angry, his left hand therefore trying to attack his wife, and his left hemisphere being more practical, trying to restrain him. So it was kind of a bizarre situation. So in just a moment, I'm going to show you a video This one's about 10 minutes long. I have edited it down to its most important parts. It's a Scientific American documentary with Michael Gazzaniga, and Alan Alda is the host. And almost everything that you need to know about split brain research and the split brain findings is covered in this video. So here we go.
We began our journey into the human brain here on the campus of Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. I'd come to meet one of the world's leading brain scientists, Mike Gazzaniga, and a man he's worked with for over a decade. A man with two brains. You've been working a long time with Dr. Gazzaniga?
14 or 15 years.
It doesn't seem like that long, does it?
The collaboration began when Joe had surgery.
And you had this procedure to correct an epileptic problem,
Yes.
is that right?
Trying to stop the seizures. I was having seizures like every day or so, or sometimes 2 or 3 a day.
To control Joe's epileptic seizures, a surgeon severed the connection between the two halves of his brain. Cutting the corpus callosum like this prevented the spread of the electric storms that caused his seizures. But it also prevented the left and right halves of his brain from communicating with each other. In the years since the operation, Joe's epilepsy has been under control. He now earns a living at an egg farm, and in his everyday life, he's largely unaffected by the fact that his left and his right brains work independently.
Do you feel any different when you think about something than you did, any differently from the way you felt before the procedure?
It's just got a backup brain, that's all.
That's something everybody could use, right?
I found out how true that was right away when I was asked to draw a different shape with each hand. In a brain like mine, roughly speaking normal, at least all in one piece, the left half of my brain controls the right side of my body, while the right brain controls the left side.
Oh, no.
But because the two halves are connected,
Nothing wrong with that.
getting each hand to work independently isn't easy.
Well, we're seeing the fact that Alan's hemispheres are connected, and that the motor messages from one are confusing the motor messages in the other.
I was just drawing an upside-down duck. Okay?
But when Joe is given the same task, his two hands operate as if controlled by two separate brains. What's happening is that each half of Joe's brain is given a separate instruction. He's asked to fix his eyes on the cross in the center of the screen. Anything flashed to the right of the cross goes only to his left hemisphere. Things to the left go to his right hemisphere. Because the two don't communicate, each hand does only what its half of the brain sees.
Wow, look at that. It's really like two different people doing the same.
That's right.
Same task.
That's the idea.
Okay, Joe, I want you to keep your hands out in front
In
of
an
you.
experiment that's now a classic in brain research, Mike Gazzaniga over 30 years ago used a similar setup to find out if the two halves of the brain are specialized to do different things.
Ship.
Joe is being flashed a word only to one half of his brain. Words flashed to the right
Storm.
are seen only by his left brain, and Joe can report seeing those words just fine.
Piano.
Good.
But when a word is flashed to his right brain,
Didn't see that.
Okay. Joe, I'm going to ask you
but now watch what happens.
to draw that with your left hand.
You're going to be lost.
Why don't you try drawing another picture of it over here, if that will help you.
Oh, phone.
Oh, okay.
Durr.
It's almost as though somebody has given him a secret communication.
That's
and
right.
now he knows that it's a telephone. But up until then, he was blind to it.
Exactly.
But he had to figure it out about as long as we did. That's really interesting. It's a picture here of somebody communicating almost with another person.
The communication is not occurring inside the head, it's occurring out on the piece of paper.
Yeah.
So far, Joe has been seeing only one word.
Cat. That's a cat
Things get
sound.
even stranger when he's flashed two words, each to only one half of his brain.
The right hemisphere saw toad. And
And so his left hand draws a toad.
So there's the toad.
Oh, it's a toad.
And this time I was able to guess what was coming.
Will they put a little three-legged stool in there later, or what?
Joe's speaking left brain saw a stool. Saying the word lets the hand that's controlled by his right brain in on the secret.
That's great. That's really interesting. And if he had seen that with the corpus callosum intact, he would have drawn a toadstool.
Right.
Not a toad and a stool.
Right, exactly the point. I've been doing this for 35 years. Yeah?
And
It gets me every time.
Yeah, it must. It must.
When Gazzaniga first did this experiment, it instantly proved that the ability to speak resides almost exclusively in the left hemisphere. Not until he sees what his right brain is drawing is Joe able to name
He
it.
said church, didn't he?
After looking at the picture.
Yeah, this time instead of naming the word, I want you to point to the word.
Again, Joe sees two words simultaneously. Bell goes to his non-speaking right brain. Music to his speaking left brain. When asked to point to a picture of what he saw, he chooses Bell. But when asked why,
Yeah, why'd you pick that one?
Music.
Music?
and when asked to explain,
There was music and bell, and those few minutes ago, last time I heard any music was coming from the bells out here, banging away.
So the bell's outside here.
So, look good enough answer to me.
what's extraordinary is that Joe's speaking left brain concocts a plausible story of why he pointed to Bell, even when some of the other pictures more obviously represent music. Gazzaniga believes this determination to find cause and effect, this desire to explain, is the left hemisphere's most marvelous property.
One of the unique things to the human brain is this need to interpret why two events occurred. What was the antecedent to this? What caused this? And if you can imagine that a species like us that has that little chip in its brain that asks those questions is going to survive rather well, because it's going to figure out more about the nature of the world than a species that doesn't have that.
Okay, Joe, I want you to keep your hand.
But as I was about to discover, the right brain has a very useful survival skill all its own.
Figure.
What do you think will happen here?
So for you, we're doing a live experiment. Never done it before.
The experiment involves the 16th century Italian painter Arcimboldo, who made faces out of fruit, flowers, meat, even books. From other research, there's reason to believe that the ability to recognize faces is located exclusively in the right hemisphere. So Mike wondered if Arcimboldo's paintings would look different to each of Joe's two brains.
So will his left hemisphere say, I saw a potato, I didn't see a face? And will his right hemisphere say, I saw the face, and not comment on the fact it was made out of a potato?
You're going to see a figure followed by a choice of two words.
If this works, it'll be terrific, but we'll see. So here it is, live.
Okay?
The first painting goes to the right hemisphere. And Joe points to face.
Down.
The next painting goes to his left brain. And this time he points to fruits. Mike seemed pleased.
Are you having a moment?
This is too good.
Again to the right brain, and Joe sees it as a face.
Point it down.
But to the left brain,
Face made out of books.
Point it up.
What are the books?
Are you happy with what you're
Fruit.
seeing?
It's unbelievable. He's doing it. You see that?
It's good. It's going so fast. It's shifting from left to right so fast. I can't keep up with you. You're used to looking at this.
When you show him a face in the right side, the left hemisphere,
Yeah.
he's focusing in on the elements that made up the face.
Yeah.
When you show him the exact same picture in the left field going to the right hemisphere, he's focusing on the face and not the elements.
And not the elements. If you came down from another planet and you saw faces and vegetables, you might not think there was much of a difference among them. But the brain seems to be made up in a certain way to say faces are very different from other objects.
That's right.
And one side of the brain specializes in faces. huh?
Exactly right. Exactly right. It is an adaptation that we have to detect upright faces. It's a very important. You can imagine in an evolutionary time that all of a sudden you have the ability to detect quickly an upright face. You want to read the expression on that face. You want to know if it's friend or foe. You want to have a set of questions about that face.
The right brain might be skilled at recognizing faces, but when it comes to what gives the human mind its power, the ability to reason, to invent, to interpret the world around it, Mike Gazzaniga's 30 years of research has taught him which hemisphere he wouldn't want to be without.
The old phrase around our lab is, don't leave home without your left hemisphere. That's where the action
Okay, we're back live. And I love that video. I've watched it many times myself. Just edited it down to the most. And what I want you to take away from that video is obviously speech is only in the left hemisphere, about 95% of us. And however, the right hemisphere can form its own thoughts, can read, can follow instructions, as you noted in the video. But the right hemisphere cannot speak on its own, but it does contribute emotional content, color, and a colloquial vocabulary to left hemisphere speech. That is, when not being inhibited by the left hemisphere. And the left hemisphere range of emotional experience and expression is much more limited than the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere capable of the heights of ecstasy and the depths of despair. And the left hemisphere range is not that wide. And as you noticed, the left hemisphere tends to details, while the right hemisphere sees the big picture patterns. And that gives rise and support to the finding that that the right hemisphere is superior at reading emotions in others from body language, facial expressions, and tone of voice. And each hemisphere is an independent conscious system. And I dare to say, as somebody else you'll hear in a few moments, a separate and independent personality. And Susan Pierce Thompson has talked about the interpreter function. And the interpreter function is found only in the left hemisphere, as Gazzaniga mentioned. And interesting for us to note here, the interpreter function is the source of all self-abusive inner dialogue and all rationalizations for right hemisphere behaviors. When you beat yourself up after any behavior that upsets you or that you're not content with, it's the left hemisphere that's doing the beating up. In this next video, it's a shorter one, this is just Michael Gazzaniga, and that video that you watched just a moment ago, that was done in 1996. And by that point, Gazzaniga had been, as he mentioned, over 30 years working with split brain patients. Now today, he's been working with them for over 50 years. And this video is of him briefly talking about the left hemisphere interpreter. And you can see he's aged some, and he is like well, I'm not sure what the expression would be. He's the senior partner. He's probably the most knowledgeable man alive on the differences between the right and left hemisphere.
In my early part of my career, and continues, I studied patients who had their two brains disconnected. What we were responsible for was working out the functions of each hemisphere. You could work with them independent of the other influencing it, so you kind of got to study it alone. And over many, many years, the basic finding is, of course, that one brain didn't know what the other one was doing in such people, that the information doesn't transfer between the brains. We found out that in the left brain, there's a special system that seems to always want to explain actions and moods that we have after they occurred. So we would put a question to the right non-speaking hemisphere, and it, in effect, would direct the left hand to do something. And so the patient would do that. And then we would simply say to the patient, well, why did you do that? The patient would make up a story that would explain why their hand had done one thing and why the other hand had done another thing, and wove a tale that made coherent, as it were, the behaviors that are coming from all these separate brain areas. The behavior comes out, and then there's this little narrator up there that turns it into a story that makes us feel coherent and unified. Turns out it's a thing in the left hemisphere that does this. And we called it the interpreter. And it's a very powerful force in the human condition, and it's always trying to figure out and seek explanations for our behavior. And that's what it does.
So what I'd like you to take away from that short clip of Gazzaniga 2013